That's how you split it, Roger.
You all good, Ross?
Roger? Same split.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, good to go, Chair. I was just trying to make sure I haven't got a phone on me that's going to go off, but I don't seem to. So.
Well, I've got 4 o'clock and a frog in my throat. Good afternoon, welcome to the Police and Crime Panel. Please note the meeting at this time is being recorded and streamed live. Before we proceed, I'd like to bring to your attention some housekeeping matters. If you wish to speak during the meeting, raise your hand, catch my eye. I don't know if that's a mixed metaphor, is it? There are no expected fire alarms today. If it does sound, then it's real. So please can everyone then leave the chamber, go down the stairs and go out into the car park in front of the building. Ross, you're going to talk about a quorum?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members, for being here. I know we had to reschedule at fairly short notice. We are quorate today, which means that we at least have a formal meeting, but unfortunately we don't have enough members to exercise a veto should you wish to do so. So that won't be possible today. So the options before you when we come to the item on the confirmation of your hearing is to agree, stroke approve, or disagree with the proposed appointment from the OPCC. I think that's all I need to say, Chair, for the moment.
Yep, thanks, Ross. Move on to item 1 then, apologies. Apologies received from...
Apologies received from Councillor Loudon, Councillor Arnott is substituting Councillor Knowles, Councillor Biederman, Councillor Dewhurst, Councillor Hackett, Councillor Atia Allah, Councillor Roger, Councillor Fitter, and Sharon Minty, the independent member for Cornwall.
Nearly half the panel.
Yeah, Chair.
Not quite.
Kevin, yeah.
Apologies from myself for an early departure at 6:10.
6:10.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll be done by then.
Fingers crossed.
Thanks. Item 2 then, the minutes for the last meeting. I propose the minutes are an accurate record of the proceedings. I've got them here somewhere. I'll go through them page by page. Page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, and page 7 is blank. I propose the minutes are an accurate record of the meeting. Do I have a seconder? Vivian, thanks very much. All in favour, please show. Thanks very much. Abstention? Okay, all right. We'll say that the minutes are a true record then, generally speaking. Item 3, declarations of interest. Anyone, in respect to the items on the agenda? No, thank you. Public questions, item 4, there are no public questions. Which moves on to item 5 with the confirmation hearing for the proposed appointment of the Chief Constable of Devon and Cornwall Police. To be honest, Devon, Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly Police. Can I just welcome as well Kate Canally, who's there if there needs to be any questions on her independent report. Can I now hand over to the Commissioner to introduce your report before we move forward to any questions from the panel? Commissioner.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate this opportunity that you have today. Is one of the most important jobs that I have as a Commissioner is to appoint a Chief Constable when we get into that situation of one leaving. And I'm delighted to be able to introduce you to my preferred candidate for the role of Chief Constable of Devon and Cornwall Police, and that is Mr. Will Kerr, OBE, sat to my left, obviously. He's currently the Deputy Chief Constable of Policing Scotland, and he has a wealth of policing experience from Northern Ireland, Scotland, the National Crime Agency, and through work he has undertaken internationally as well. I've made my decision to make Mr Kerr my preferred candidate based on my robust recruitment process, which followed the required legislative process, the Home Office circular and guidance by the College of Policing. It's quite particular, and as you are aware, you have to have an independent member as part of the process to oversee and act as an assurance, and Kate Canally, Chief Exec of Cornwall Council, was such, and her report is included as part of this paperwork. I was really pleased with the level of interest that we had in the role and the calibre of the applicants that we had apply. The process in particular was also supported by my Chief Executive, and a representative from the College of Policing was present throughout. The college provided very complimentary feedback to the main interview panel on the way in which the process was run, and specifically commented on the high quality written resources used throughout the process, both the familiarisation opportunities for all candidates and the engagement of a wide range of stakeholders from across Devon and Cornwall. The college also noted that this was the first time that a Police and Crime Commissioner had undertaken a police officer and staff survey to inform the process about what they wanted to see in a future Chief Constable, and the first time police cadets were also involved in the process, so we had some under 18 young people also there. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of the partners, police officers, police staff and community members, particularly my Chief Executive, who worked tirelessly to get this right, and particularly the multiple panels that formed the 2 days in particular of the interview process. Their feedback was actually incredibly invaluable and really helped the main interview panel actually come to a final decision about who we should choose. As you are aware, your role today is not to re-interview Mr Kerr. He's had plenty of that happening with us already, but to be satisfied that I have undertaken a robust process which is based on merit and has met the principles of fairness and openness. You have the opportunity to explore key issues with Mr Kerr relating to his professional competence and operational independence to help inform your decision. Specifically would like to thank the leaders and councillors that were involved in the process as well, and some particular individual professional heads of service. Kareem Hassan, Chief Executive of Exeter City Council and Exeter City Futures, Mark Shelford, the Police and Crime Commissioner for Avon and Somerset, Angela Cossines, who is the South West Regional Director of Probation, and Kate Canally, who's the Chief Exec of Cornwall Council and also acted as the independent member. We particularly invited councils to be involved. We had Cornwall Council. There wasn't any representatives available from Devon County Council or Plymouth City Council, but Torbay Council and Exeter City Council were also represented, as well as a wide range of partners from elsewhere in crime and justice and the community and voluntary sector. So I do hope that you appreciate the robust and inclusive way in which I have carried out this important task. I will now hand back to the Chairman to conduct the confirmation hearing in accordance with the rules, although I appreciate you don't have your power of veto due to numbers, but with respect, we'll hear your feedback and await your scrutiny and formal response by the end of today. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And then can I belatedly welcome Will Kerr formally to the meeting of the panel. And I would just like now to open up the floor for members. Any questions? Remember, it's not an interview. Okay, I've just reminded of the fact that you might want to question the process. Any questions on the process? Nikki, Councillor Hotwood.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't know what this is a question on, so I'm just going to ask it. You mentioned that in the interview panel you didn't have any members, anybody from Plymouth City Council or another council turn up, but you Devon County, but you had other councils. Can I have assurance from you that? So I don't know how to ask this without asking a question. Mr. Kerr has the experience with towns and parishes, because obviously there was no one on the interview, as far as I can see from the names you've read out, no one on the actual interview panel that came from the smaller towns and parishes. And although you're looking after, because you've invited people from the cities, we are covered in towns and parishes through Devon and Cornwall. So can I have assurance that the towns and parishes will be equally as well looked after as the cities?
Thank you, Councillor Hopwood. The people who were represented were in stakeholder panels from those councils. It was either chief executive level or leaders of councils that were invited. So they didn't get to ask a specific question to Mr. Kerr about any of the things in relation to that. They were sometimes just observers of some of the process. So some of them were observers of the media interview, and some were particularly, the ones who were on the interview panel. But the stakeholder arrangement was that there was a broad range of people from across Devon and Cornwall that were there, not necessarily from a council, but from a community representative, like the police cadets weren't all from the cities. We also had, for example, Councillor Mike Joyce, who was from Newton Abbot, who was part of the process as well. So there's a range of ways in which we've done it. We didn't ask specific questions about local authority governance on a town and parish level in the interview process. We talked more about competencies and values that we have to adhere to as part of the process that we have to adhere to the College of Policing. So I wouldn't be afraid that the voice isn't there. I represent all towns, parishes, counties, unitaries and islands. So I'm the voice of some of that as well.
What were the key challenges that the process identified from the beginning, so the successful candidate would face, and what strengths were you looking for in order to meet those challenges?
I suppose in the first instance, through the shortlisting process, which we use the competency framework for in order to do that, it pulled out those that could meet a standard good enough to become a chief constable. So the evidence that they gave through that process as to whether or not they met those competencies. As we went through into the 2-day process, what we were trying to pull out from them is particularly how they coped under pressure. That was one of the things that we did through. So, for example, the media interview was done with a professional ex-journalist in front of a TV camera with actually an audience watching as well. So, normally a chief constable doesn't even do studio TV interviews, I can tell you, in the past. So this is about putting them under pressure and how they cope with difficult questions under pressure. So that was one of the things to pull out through the interview process. A couple of the others was just in terms of engagement, how they were able to listen, understand and take information and understand it well. That was pulled out through the interview process. And because we also enabled a panel of staff representatives, which means we got a representative of things like our Black Police Association, LGBTQ+ Association, the Federation. Each shortlisted candidate was able to meet with actual staff and officers to have conversations with, to pull out their level of engagement with minority groups as well. So there's a few opportunities to pull out particular competencies that we might have been looking for Devon and Cornwall.
So any more questions on the process? No, I don't think so. So,
Thank you, Chair. Welcome, Mr. Kerr. So I'm Martin Alvey. I'm one of the Cabinet members in Cornwall Council, and part of my Cabinet role is blue light collaboration and emergency management. So if your post is confirmed, clearly we'll have a working relationship, hopefully. My question relates to actually some of the challenges of rural policing, and something that we have down in Cornwall that is unique to the whole country, and that's a tri-service safety officer. I would like to ask, are you aware of the tri-service safety officer project, and would you be keen to see it continue and ideally expand possibly to other parts of the force area?
Thank you, Councillor. There'll be a very straightforward answer to that, which is yes, but if I could perhaps just flavour the answer a wee bit with, you talked, as did Councillor Hopwood, about my experience of dealing with isolated and rural communities, and I'm responsible for local policing across the whole of Scotland at the moment, and as I'm sure most of you are aware, Outside the central belt between Glasgow and Edinburgh, most of Scotland is rural and isolated. It's a third of the landmass of the United Kingdom. It's 60% of the coastline. It's got 90 inhabited islands, and quite a few of those have got very specific needs, which means that they need a very specific and a very sensitive policing response, which is locally based, locally respected and recognised, and locally present, particularly on the islands. So I have a lot of experience of it, making sure that local policing services reflect the needs of urban, rural, isolated and island communities, and the importance of listening to each of those communities differently and coming up with bespoke policing solutions. So I hope that gives you some reassurance. Councillor Hopwood, on your original question. To answer your very specific question, Councillor Alvey, I think it's a tremendous idea. We don't have it in Scotland. I think the idea of taking together civilians in uniform who have got a range of powers and experience and skills, not least medic skills, and putting them in the areas that each of those individual emergency services or partner agencies might struggle to put a specific presence in, and having somebody who represents that sort of public service and system as a whole is present and visible in those local communities and is able to access the databases from the three agencies involved. I think it's a tremendous idea, and I would be very keen to see it expand as much as possible.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Chris, yeah, Councillor Payne.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me if I stray slightly. We're meant to be asking the criteria set out in the role profile, and I can't find a role profile in the pack you sent, Commissioner. So we've got the competencies framework, but I can't find the role profile. So if I err, please forgive me. I just wanted to sort of follow up a bit on that. I've got a couple of interrelated areas, Chair, which for those who know me on the panel will not be surprised by either. But I just wondered whether you might like to talk a little about your approach to community policing and engagement. Resources are always tightly restricted, but we know that that matters, whether it's how communities are engaged in a major event, as we saw down in Newquay last year, or some of the horrific events we've experienced here in Plymouth in the last 12 months, whether community engagement matters on both of those extremes, and not only as a reaction, but as something proactive. And I wonder whether you might be prepared to talk a little about where you see community engagement and community policing within a service you might lead.
Thank you. It's a great question. I mean, one of the things that attracted me to apply for the job as Chief Constable of Devon and Cornwall Police is that I think it's got a number of very compelling strengths down here that go to community engagement, community partnership and community respect. So the amount of the pride and service in Devon and Cornwall Police, the active community involvement and working alongside policing and trying to prevent harms to local communities and vulnerable individuals. I think all those strong component parts exist here. Look, policing is built from neighbourhoods up. I've worked as a head of counter-terrorism in Belfast. I've worked as a director in the National Crime Agency dealing with high-end, serious and organised crime. I understand risk. But in each of those roles, irrespective of what the policing function was, community confidence starts at local neighbourhood level. And our responsibility and mine, should you confirm me today in role, is about making sure that that presence, that those relationships, those partnerships exist and start at local neighbourhood level, because irrespective of how the organisation as a whole is structured, if you don't have those basic component parts right, if you're not neighbourhood based and prevention focused, working with partners to try and prevent as much harm as possible. It's Sir Robert Peel's 9th principle of policing, the test of policing efficiency as the absence of crime and disorder, not visible evidence of police activity to deal with it. That's a 200-year-old principle, and I know from 33 years of policing experience that whether you work in local policing or serious and organised crime or counter-terrorism, those same principles apply every bit as much to that full continuum of policing responsibilities. It's a rather long way of saying that I wouldn't have applied for the job down here if I didn't think it was important to this police service, and if I didn't think I could bring a lot to the table in terms of that basic mindset of how every local community views and experiences public services, including policing, through local identity, through a local lens of what they see and experience locally. If we don't get that right in the police service, and it's one thing I would be very keen to do, to continue to use the uplift of police officer numbers, some of that supported by the precept, of course, as well as the central government funding. It's incredibly important that a significant number of those police officers, despite that full range of threats and risks that Devon and Cornwall Police deal with on your and our community's behalf, go into those local communities and are based. So the reopening of front offices again, reopening of police stations, getting those community anchor points which go to the heart of community confidence and community contact is absolutely key. And we can't expect the public to act with us as our partner. We can't expect them to give us information if we're not prepared to go out and be as active in that engagement as we possibly can be. So I hope you get a sense of the passion I have for this area of police work as well, and how important I see this element of police work. But I am a strong advocate of proactive community engagement and support built from the neighbourhood up. And should I be confirmed today, I can assure you that will be at the heart of what Devon and Cornwall Police does over the next few years.
Thank you. I'm sure that people listening into this who won't have been part of your recruitment process will be heartened to hear that across communities, not only here in Plymouth, but across Devon, Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. I just want to follow up, if I may, Chair, just by digging a little deeper into communities of identity, which in an area like Devon and Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly can be very scattered. We see in the Commissioner's report, which we'll be discussing later, that hate crime continues to rise, especially hate crime that is sex or gender related, and that is worrying. I just wondered whether you had any thoughts specifically about policing within those protected characteristic communities and your approaches there.
Well, yes, thank you again, Councillor. Very similar issues faced in Scotland and in London when I worked down in Belfast before that as well. The rise in the areas you talked about, the principal areas of rise, just when I was reading through the figures last night around racially motivated sexual orientation and disability related hate crime, in some respects, and it's the same in Scotland, the increase in numbers reflect more realistically actually the nature and scale of this problem and the nature of the criminality when it comes to hate crime. So in some respects, although each one of those individual crimes is massively traumatic, even though most of them tend to be verbal rather than physical, they're still massively traumatic in the victim. And the job of policing is to continue to build trust and confidence in those communities and lifestyle communities who perhaps haven't had as much trust in the police service in the past, to make sure that we continue to get a more realistic reflection of where it's happening, both physically within communities and on the streets, and increasingly online, which is where the biggest growth of hate crime tends to be. But there's also some very specific responsibilities in policing to make sure, again, we try and prevent as much of it as we can at source and with partners, but also to deal with it very robustly after the fact. So if somebody has the courage to come forward and make a criminal complaint to the police service, perhaps hasn't had as much trust as they should have had in policing in the past, our job is to make sure that they get a fair, equitable, compassionate, but very robust police response, that we deal with our core mission, which is to tackle crime and to tackle crime effectively. And I think that would be a very clear part of what I would be interested in when it comes to hate crime. Understand the figures, make sure we encourage and continue to build that trust and confidence so that the figures and the reporting is realistic, and then be unambiguously robust in responding to it as well, so that victims know they can come forward to their police service and get a supportive but effective investigation.
Thank you, and I'm sure that those people listening into this from our minority communities will be wanting to hold you to that if you are successful in your appointment. But thank you for your answers.
Yeah, I think the rise in hate crime is a bit of a conundrum, put down either mainly because people feel that they can actually approach now. So it's difficult to know whether it's on the rise or whether it was there already. Any further questions? Kevin, I think, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome. Devon, Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly is, of course, a huge geographical area, not as big as Police Scotland, of course. But given that experience, and you mentioned earlier the importance of listening, how would that work in practice and organise within the organisation? Because listening is important, but given the resources you have, that is difficult sometimes. So what experience worked well in your previous roles, and what ideas have you got to bring to us in the Southwest?
Thank you, Councillor. I mean, in some respects, it's part of that listening responsibility is about going back to basics as well. There are a number of pre-existing partnerships who provide a collective means of actually hearing as many voices as possible at one time. But inevitably, particularly going back to the previous question about relationships with particularly isolated or other communities who haven't had that same positive relationship with policing in the past, you've got to spend a bit of individual time with them. And getting the balance right between those two things is often quite difficult because it's a largest force area in England and Wales, and Devon and Cornwall Police. We have exactly the same issue in Scotland. And getting the balance right between being visible, civically engaged, getting out and about of the office as much as is possible as a leader should do, and as a chief constable should be visible and reflect the community concerns, particularly the 4 concerns that you're going to talk about in the report, in the police and crime report. That's incredibly important, that I can talk actively about them and show that sense of community respect. That if communities have said that those 4 things are really important to them, then my job is to go out and make sure that they know that their police service are listening and are actively targeting those areas with local communities and local partners. So I don't think there's any easy algorithm to how you do listening. It's just about trying to be as present as possible, some structure attached to it as well, making sure that you don't particularly forget rural or isolated communities. It's always easy to go to the urban conurbations, and in Scotland, it's easy to stay within the central belt because within 30 to 40 minutes you can move between Glasgow and Edinburgh. If it's a 12-hour ferry journey from Aberdeen up to Lerwick to go up to Shetland, that's a bit more difficult. But actually, one of the things that the pandemic has done for us is give us a better sense of technology and how we can use Teams and other virtual means to go out and listen as much as possible. One of the other things that I've always done in Scotland, both internally and with community members, and it works, as I can see it, incredibly well down here with councillor advocates, is actually have create a trusted suite of advocates that you can share as much information with as possible, who can get exposure and access to police meetings, who can go out and effectively amplify what it is you're trying to say and what you're trying to do, but actually probably at a closer level than sometimes I can be. And I'll end with the point that if confirmed today, I'm also been appointed to run the police service and run Devon and Cornwall Police, and I have to get that balance right. So there's always a limitation, and the last 33 years I've always heard, and I'm just giving you a very honest answer here as well, I've always heard that senior police leaders should be more visible, and that's absolutely a valid challenge, but it has to be balanced with the ability to be able to run the force properly, and my job is to try and, if confirmed, get that balance right. But I can assure you I couldn't agree more with the need to get out and listen as actively and as much as possible, but then importantly respond to that as well. No point listening if you're not going to do something about it. Thank you.
Councillor Chober.
Thank you, and welcome. I represent a very rural area up in North Cornwall, which historically obviously has always struggled with police numbers, and the Commissioner is very kindly getting us hopefully a Bude police front station sorted soon. But from a point of view of recruitment, I was going to sort of touch on recruitment rather than and keeping the local knowledge. Particularly in North Cornwall, we seem to struggle to keep police officers because they've come to the end of their 30 years or whatever, so we're losing a lot of local knowledge. And then obviously we've got, I was going to say youngsters, but they're obviously all younger than me, but obviously that we've got younger people coming through, but they don't tend to stay in Devon and Cornwall. So what's your answer to try and keep people here, whether they decide not to retire early or whatever? And then how are we going to keep those recruitment numbers up? Because I was going to ask probably Alison, as to what the recruitment numbers are looking like actually, but touching on, how do we keep those people here? And I did have a second question, but Kevin stole my thunder about what were your ideas about bringing new ideas possibly to Devon and Cornwall in the way of what have you learnt, and thinking actually I could do that better in Devon and Cornwall that you have been doing in Scotland, but you've sort of semi-answered that with the second bit. Thank you.
Thank you. If you're happy, I'll just answer that first part, Chair. So I mean, how do you get that balance right between structural presence in terms of the number of police stations and our physical presence in communities, which is incredibly important, and certainly was incredibly important in the island community in Scotland as well, but also that physical, personal presence from local beat cops and neighbourhood officers who are locally respected and recognised and trusted. And again, there's no straightforward answer to that. There's always going to be a capacity limitation on how many neighbourhood officers you can put out, and you cannot put them in every single community, and certainly we couldn't in Scotland either. And one of the things we looked to do slightly differently was to, on the structural side of the house, was to make sure that we co-located. It comes back to the question about tri-service officers, was about making full use of all the key public services that we work alongside, and particularly in Scotland with our most important partner, which was local government. We have quite a few areas of Scotland in the 32 local government areas, the 32 councils, where we co-located. So in the northeast in Aberdeen is a perfect case in point where I housed I closed down the divisional headquarters in Aberdeen City, and we moved them into the council headquarters in Marischal College, and it's been immensely successful. There are efficiencies for both sides in terms of costs and challenges, but the benefit of it was more intangible. The benefit wasn't just around pounds, shillings and pence. The benefit was that you get people sitting around the same table physically out with the pandemic and talking to each other about common problems. And they realised what we all know, of course, and you will know as a local councillor, which is we're all dealing with the same communities, families and individuals. We just call them different things, or we record them in different systems, and forcing people to sit down around the table, have that conversation, share data and information, not become inhibited by GDPR, and actually have a mature conversation about how we coordinate resources for the benefit of that local community has worked very well. I do think there's also a bit about, and one of the things I would want to look at early, and I've had this conversation with the Commissioner, and without making policy up before I've actually landed in the job or have been confirmed, I put that caveat on this point, I do think there's something about with a transient workforce at the moment, because there's so much churn in policing, particularly with the uplift numbers, and so many people are retiring under the old pension scheme, that we probably have another year or two of this left, just being entirely frank about the nature and the volume of churn. But I think one of the things I would be very keen to do, if confirmed, is to sit down with local community representatives and key partners and have that conversation about what, and I use the term loosely, not specifically, what a tenure policy, what that would look like, how long is an appropriate period of time for a local beat cop or an area commander to work in a local community so that you get the most out of them, you can build a relationship with them, but it doesn't go on so long that it starts to stagnate or it starts to create a range of other challenges. I don't know what the answer to that is yet. I just know I'm very keen to have that conversation. And I'll finish on this point, Councillor. You're right about some of the needs of Cornwall. One of the other significant pulls for me to apply for the job down here is that my wife went to school and grew up in Truro, and explains to me very consistently and persistently about the needs of this fantastic part of the world as well. And we spend a lot of our time down here with family as well. So I'm very, very conscious just about some of the challenges of isolated and rural communities, particularly in the Cornwall side of the two counties and on the Isles of Scilly. Thank you.
Just come back and obviously just extend an invitation in your first week to perhaps visit North Cornwall. That would be great. Thank you.
Councillor Hopwood.
Thank you, Chair. I got the invitation in first, so to visit Woolwell. I just have to say that. I mean, your experience throughout your police career is exceptionally impressive. The broad width of knowledge you must have gained through the various roles you've been in, and I've been heartened by two things. what you've just said, that your wife grew up in Truro, so you truly have a knowledge of Cornwall, which would encompass Devon as well, so I'm delighted to hear that. And you do keep coming back to community, which is music to my ears, because throughout listening to what we have, the discussion we've had now, you so often go back to basics and say community and want to engage with local partners and local people. And I think I welcome that, and I think that the residents out on the streets will welcome that. And I think we need a bit of old-fashioned policing brought back. Bobby's on the beat, or people, I cross my fingers that that may be in your plan, I don't know, but to see you know, to see that you're actually going to engage from the bottom up. Too many people and too many communities go from the top down. So to say you're going to go from the bottom up, because those people on the ground are the most important people to I believe, the police force. So I don't, you know, we're having a discussion. I don't know whether we're going to confirm you or not today, but I am just heartened to hear you mention community and engaging with local people so much throughout everything you've said. So thank you for that.
Don't think that was a question, was it? No. No, right, okay. Good, thanks. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to Will. I'm from Exeter, and a lot of work that's been going on in Exeter in partnership with the police recently, as I'm sure you'll know, is around the safety of women and girls at night, but as I like to say, the safety of everybody, but with a particular focus on that. And this week, a very good initiative is launching, or operation, not the word initiative, got it wrong, surrounding, coinciding with Freshers Week and a lot of new young people, students being in the city, as well as all of our residents. So I'm really pleased to see that happening, and a lot of that, part of that initiative is to sort of watch out for inappropriate behaviour, intimidating behaviour and language, etc. What's your sort of take on alongside that, making sure that the public have every confidence in our police force here, for also having that same approach to the awareness of the use of language and approach to what could be seen sometimes as inappropriate attitude? I'm not saying that Devon and Cornwall police have that reputation at all, but unfortunately at the moment there's a reputation from another police force that perhaps sometimes slants things. I'm not sure where the question was there. I think if you found it, well done.
I think I did, Councillor Wright, if the Chair is happy for me to answer it. Yeah, listen, it's a massively important subject, as you rightly outlined, and I think the start of how we respond to it is undoubtedly internal, and it's around how we treat people internally within the organisation that is policing, and one of the key markers of confidence in policing is fairness and respect, and that starts internally as well. And I think, so the work that you've talked about in Exeter, and I know there are other areas of Devon, Cornwall, and Isles of Scilly that are proactively addressing violence against women and girls, as we all should do. My own personal and strong view is that policing should be in the vanguard of addressing violence against women and girls. We have a very privileged and a significant amount of responsibilities and powers and presence in the street. Some of that will go to how we create safe spaces for women and girls, and as you said, applies to everybody, but specifically women and girls. And that's an online presence, not just a physical presence in the streets. Some of it will go to the answer I gave earlier on in respect of hate crime, about how robust and assertive our response is when it does happen. Some of it goes to how we can prevent, not just through criminal justice means, but by working with partners and challenging some of the language, the precursor language and actions before it actually, the matter becomes even more serious. Not that it's serious or isn't serious right at the very beginning. And to give you hopefully a sense of just encouragement from me personally. When I say policing should be in the vanguard, some of that involves personal responsibility from senior police leaders. So you may have done your online research in this anyway about me, but certainly after one of those cases you've talked about, particularly after the sentencing of Wayne Couzens for the horrific murder of Sarah Everard in London, the statement that Police Scotland put out was specifically, and I wrote it and it went out in my name, but it was specifically to accept our sense of responsibility. And the language was very purposeful, and the language was that the onus of responsibility is on us. We were professionally shamed by that horrific murder. And so if women and girls didn't feel confident in the presence of or in engaging with police officers on the street, then our responsibility, and that's why I used that specific language about onus of responsibility in us, was to do something about that, not to tell people to wave a bus down, not to tell people to do something that was impractical or gave a sense that the victim or somebody who's scared and on the street might be in some way responsible for what has happened. Absolutely the opposite. It was about us stepping in and saying, we're responsible for this. We own this issue. We need to both do and be seen to do something about it. So the officer verification scheme, slightly easier in Scotland because with the laws of corroboration in Scotland, they're very rarely single officer patrols. But it just meant that if somebody was out on their own and encountered a police officer and they were wary or unsure, that there was a simple process where they could get the identity of that officer verified very quickly. Fairly standardised, simple process. And to me, that was incredibly important because it went to us owning not just the problem, but part of the solution to the problem as well. So an incredibly important issue, and it's great to see it being discussed openly as it should be, but policing has got a massive responsibility in this space as well.
Thank you, Chair, and I think more or less congratulations, Will. So we don't have the power of veto, do we? So, well, welcome to Devon and Cornwall. So I carry an Irish passport as well as a UK passport. I've got my oldest son lives in Glasgow, so I understand quite a bit of the background you've got. And you may notice my surname, it's not Steve Arnott, it's Paul Arnott, but anyway, yeah, okay, I won't continue that line of thought. You've been appointed by a police and crime commissioner through a process that sounds absolutely excellent and flawless as far as I can see, but who is nevertheless, of course, from a political party. What will you do if you find you have to conduct an investigation in which actions of that political party in Devon and Cornwall come into question?
Thank you, Councillor, and I absolutely get the line of duty reference as well. Not only what I would do, I have found myself in this position in the past in a number of different jurisdictions, and the primacy of the rule of law and the integrity of the rule of law is paramount, and I would have absolutely no hesitation in applying the law fairly and consistently and making sure that there are very clear, as there are at the moment, clear constitutional boundaries and firewalls between my office and the office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. The one thing which has been assuring for me, and actually was again another reason why I applied for the job down here, in that in conversations with the Commissioner, irrespective of party politics, one of the things that has really impressed me has been that shared sense of community focus and community responsibility, and that's important to me for the reasons I've outlined earlier on, and it's why I was very keen and put so much time and effort into the application process, which was, as you say, very onerous as well and very challenging, but as it should be, because it's a privilege to be a Chief Constable and the process should be onerous to get you to this point. So listen, please don't labour under any worry or misapprehension that after 33 years in policing and having worked for 26, 27 years in Belfast, I absolutely understand what the boundary lines are. I will not hesitate to take whatever action that policing needs to take to protect the integrity of the rule of law. I can't see that happening, and whilst there should of course be some healthy tension in the system between the Commissioner and I, that's what civic accountability, properly civic accountability for policing, democratically mandated, should mean. I have absolutely no doubt from my ongoing conversations with her that we'll have a strong and a productive relationship that puts communities at the heart of what we do.
Any further questions, members? I have one. As part of your application, in addition to the CV, you were required to fill out a questionnaire on competency and values framework. One of the questions was, we are innovative and open-minded. Given the fact that society is changing rapidly, I mean, no longer do, I don't think, people don a black and red striped jumper and throw a swag bag over their back when you can sit in the comfort of your living room and hit thousands of people all at one go. And that there's so much importance now placed upon social media and false and fake news, etc., etc. So we are innovative and open-minded. The panel were not privy to the questionnaire. So can I ask how you answered that? It was a maximum of 250 words, but you don't have to use 250 today.
Thank you, Councillor. I wish I could remember the exact example I used to that form. I hope I can give you a gist as well. Good policing is always going to be a balance between modern capabilities, particularly dealing with online crime, which has been a growing area of crime, particularly online fraud over the last number of years, mixed with those traditional values that we've talked about so much over the course of the last half an hour. And we've seen the best, I would say this, and I'm proud to say this as well. I'm proud, having been a police officer for the last 33 years, that we've seen the best of that British policing over the last couple of weeks after the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. That courtesy, professionalism, respect, I think has been incredibly important. So that mix between being able to use modern technology, and I've done this as a director in the National Crime Agency. One of the things I was responsible for was CEOP, the Child Exploitation and Online Protection Centre, and that is an area where we absolutely have needed and consistently need to use innovation, because actually being able to trying to stay ahead of the multitude of possibilities and opportunities through online gaming, a range of other mediums where predatory paedophiles can actually target and try and abuse children. And that's where we worked really closely with obviously with a range of other charity and third sector organisations, but also we worked with intelligence agencies. We worked with a range of other partners to make sure that we had the best of those technical capabilities. Some of them, as you'll understand, I'll not go into a lot of detail now because it would we don't want to expose and make it easy for the people who look to exploit those platforms to abuse children. But one of the things I talked about a lot during the application process, and having been proudly a director in the National Crime Agency for a couple of years, was how we used that technology to tackle what was a changing profile of organised criminality, where they started to treat the person as a commodity and not an intangible element like drugs. Or it wasn't just acquisitive crime, it was about treating people who were vulnerable to exploitation, to human trafficking, and trying to tackle the business model that organised crime gangs used globally at the moment to move, say for example, vulnerable young girls who they were looking to sexually exploit in European countries, but moving them from the African continent, moving them from Eastern European countries. The level of innovation, technical capabilities and partnership working that you need to tackle those people-based crimes has been growing over the last number of years, and it's something I've been proudly involved in, because there's no greater risk than the risk to a person, particularly a young girl or a young boy who's been exploited, moved through various countries and then been repeatedly abused, and the sense of urgency that law enforcement needs to have to be able to tackle that, address it, identify the victims and protect them as quickly as possible needs consistent innovation. So I think innovation is no longer a one-off in policing. It's a persistent, consistent means and mode of working for law enforcement to stay ahead of crime gangs and criminals who are exploiting every single opportunity, particularly online threats, to try and target and abuse our citizens at every single opportunity.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Arnott, yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair. I was really interested in that part of your CV, Will, which was to do with child exploitation and child abuse, and really pleased to see bringing a level of expertise there. Have you had experience of historic sex abuse cases as well? And I suppose just to ask you, is there a sort of statute of limitations on that as far as you're concerned, or if it goes back to the 1980s, 90s, noughties, is that something the force is still going to be interested in?
Yeah, it's an incredibly complex area, also an incredibly emotive area, because there is no statute of limitations in law for most of the offences, because most of them are sufficiently serious that there shouldn't be a statute of limitations. But the further it is away from the index offence, the more difficult it is to get a criminal justice solution to somebody who has been undergoing, in some cases, generational trauma and just want to see the perpetrator or the offender put before a court and for justice to be served. So we have a really significant responsibility when it comes to historic child abuse to make sure that we act in the best interest of that victim. We are the entry point into the criminal justice system. Sometimes that will mean putting a case before the Criminal Prosecution Service and trying to prosecute a case. The longer it is, the more difficult that is, and sometimes, frankly, that's a real challenge, as you would understand, dealing with victims who've had this in their lives and the trauma in their life for 30 years, and saying to them, and I've had to have some of these really difficult conversations, that there's very little likelihood or realistic prospect of successfully bringing this case to a conclusion and a conviction, and that's really difficult. But even if that is difficult within the formal criminal justice system, the compassion and respect that police officers can show when they deal with these cases, and allowing somebody to tell their story, present that as evidence, connect the dots, because very often what happens in those historic cases is they are not one-off isolated incidents. If it's familial abuse, there's often other victims. If it's institutional abuse, there are very often other victims. And part of that process and the finding that evidence and the story of those individual victims is about looking at the system as a whole to make sure that there are no longer any of those threats in that system or in that family or in that community, and trying to prevent those threats today. And the historic sexual abuse cases, just when you think it's finished, it's not. There's always another institution that we're finding more and more issues with. And I think it's going to be a challenge, and rightly a challenge for policing for quite a few years to come.
Thank you. Any further questions at all? If there are none, then the panel are now required to deliberate, and I ask that the panel consider passing a resolution under section 100A, brackets on 4, brackets off, of the Local Government Act 1972 to exclude the press and public from the meeting for the following item of business on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 1 of Part 2 of Schedule 12A of the Act, as amended by the Freedom of Information Act 2000. Will the panel consider that now, and please show whether you're in favour? Thank you. Thank you very much. Commissioner, Mr. Kerr, thank you. I'm going to gently throw... Are we all here? I think we are, aren't we? Okay, so following due consideration by the panel members, the panel unanimously agreed and confirmed its full support for the appointment of Mr. Will Kerr as the new Chief Constable of Devon and Cornwall Police. Not forgetting the Isles of Scilly, of course. Did you wish to say anything, Chief Constable? Don't have to.
No, in the interest of time, just thank you very much indeed. It's going to be an absolute privilege to be your Chief Constable, and I very much look forward to getting started. So thank you very much for your time this afternoon.
Commissioner?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chairman. Well, firstly, I'd like to, I'm very pleased to have received the support of the panel for the appointment, both the process, and obviously you've been impressed by Mr. Will Kerr, OBE, to be our Chief Constable. Won't be starting for a few months, so bear with us on that. It has got leave to give in Policing Scotland. But one of the things I will say that I think probably came across while he's been here as well, and it came across really clearly in the 2 days that he was with us and meeting many members of the communities. He's absolutely proud to be a police officer. He's really clear it's his responsibility, policing, and he absolutely is clear who his ultimate boss is, and that's the communities of Devon, Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly when he gets here, not me. And I think that's what you want to see, it's what I want to see, and we really look forward to him starting. Hopefully it'll be around the new year.
And can I also say the fact that you have an open invitation to any of the panel meetings? Please turn up. You don't have to. But you'll be very welcome. And can I also say, Fran, Commissioner, that I don't think I've ever seen a more comprehensive report for an appointment. It took me ages to read it. So then, can we move on then, panel, to item 6. So this item was due to be delivered by the Independent Office for Police Conduct. However, due to recent events, they have been unable to make this meeting. This item will now be deferred to the next panel meeting. Item 7, Commissioner's Update Report. Can I hand over to the Commissioner at this point?
Thank you, Chairman. I'll highlight a few things as always in the report, and obviously you can ask me any further questions. I suppose it's a bit appropriate to obviously say that we've had the retirement of Sean Sawyer as the former Chief Constable that has happened, and we've got a temporary Chief Constable at the moment in Jim Colwell, who is holding the fort. As I said, we'll expect Mr Kerr to start around January time. But I think it's probably right for the panel. I know how much you've spent time with Mr Sawyer while he was here, had to deal with a number of major issues, including G7, including the issues that we've had with the Key and mass shooting in Plymouth, including the murders that we've had on our patch, and also a whole austerity measures that he was overseeing while he's been here. And I'm sure that you would like to pass on his well wishes and thanks for his service as well. So thank you to those of you who've already wished him that since he's gone. Just in terms of something I think is really important, I spent yesterday in particular speaking with some South Devon businesses, chambers of commerce, with the MP Anne-Marie Morris. So I thought it'd be really pertinent to highlight two elements around antisocial behaviour, because it will be of importance to you and your communities too. The new victim service that is available, so if you have victims that have been suffering antisocial behaviour and are actually really personally affected by it, they now have a victim service that is, it went live on the 1st of August. It's still being built, but there is access to that service now if people needed it. And also the youth outreach service that we've got for antisocial behaviour. I'm really keen for my office to be a referral point into that service, not just local authorities or local policing. I want my office to be a referral into that service, and where you have particular groups of people causing antisocial behaviour in your community that are of a young age, I have that outreach service to go and do some proactive outreach. It's in addition to anything you already offer within your local authority areas. So I just wanted to particularly highlight that to you. And again, the go live date for that was the 15th of August, so we should be able to start really going live with that on the ground. Other things that will be really key for you, just to flag the grants that are available on antisocial behaviour. Cornwall have just been in the middle of running theirs through Cornwall Community Foundation, which is funding that I give them for local community and voluntary groups to apply. Devon's has just gone live, so there is £1,000 to £5,000 available for community and voluntary groups to access for antisocial behaviour. It's open until the 2nd of November, the Devon one, so if you want to access that, I really encourage your connections in your communities to really look at what they can do as projects there. In the other area I wanted to flag, because I think this is absolutely, it's the biggest thing that affected me, if any panel members that may recall who may have been here at the time when I first got elected, was the lack of therapeutic support for children who have been exploited or abused. There wasn't any available. when I first arrived, and the government did give us £200,000 at that point to set up a service. My office has also managed to achieve another £200,000 towards helping children in relation to who have been abused or exploited, and I think it's hard. I've been down to visit some of our services that we commission, and it's absolutely clear that there are many children who need this support, and this is really heartwarming to know that we're going to be able to build that service even more. So I just wanted to flag that particular one. Safer Streets 4, we are constantly, my office is relentlessly trying to pursue those additional resources to fight crime in areas where we've got hotspots, so that it's additionality that we're bringing to it and not using business as usual resources only. We've been really successful in Safer Streets 4. Every bid that we help facilitate, put forward to the government, has been accepted. So Torbay has some money, Cornwall, North Devon, Exeter and Plymouth. And I have to say, as we have Councillor Wright in the room, Exeter University in particular have been very proactive in obtaining their own funds separately as well. So really, really good to see the efforts that have gone to really try and make our streets safer in Devon and Cornwall. And the last thing I wanted to particularly highlight to you is the productivity and sparsity element of the update. The Home Office has requested calls for evidence in relation to seasonality and sparsity in relation to the funding formula review that they're doing at the moment. My office will be submitting a response, and the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners will likely submit a joint response as well. I have, if you'd like, just a little flavour and insight of some of the things that we're looking at. Nikki Allen's literally just been working on it this week, so I don't know if you'd just like a couple of points from Nikki on the sort of things we're looking at. It's really critical for us to get our voice heard during this funding formula review, but particularly on sparsity and seasonality. So if you wouldn't mind, Chairman, if Nikki could just give you a flavour. Oh, there you are. Give you a flavour.
Thank you very much. It's just to really give you a flavour of the types of evidence and data that we're looking to submit as part of this call for evidence from the Home Office. And it's just to remind you that the objective is to evidence that sparsity and seasonality does increase the cost to a particular force across an area. For sparsity, what we're looking at is the fact that for Devon and Cornwall, we are looking at the infrastructure required to cover the geographical area. So things like the number of custody units, the number of special functions that we need to have so that when they are called upon in particular areas, they are there in a good time for the response to any crime or incident. We're also looking at the productivity that can be lost by the fact that our officers have to travel further to deal with incidents and crimes. So it's about understanding the difference between the productivity in rural areas and in urban areas due to the type of travel that we would have to do. It's also to look at the impact on those response times to crimes and incidents. So we're pulling out quite a lot of data on that at the moment. With regard to seasonality, you will remember that we submitted a special grant bid in 2019, and what we're doing is building on the evidence that we used within that particular grant claim. And what we're trying to do is to evidence that, or what we are doing is to evidence that the surge across the summer is very different to the surge across, say, one particular event or a weekend event. We are looking at maintaining that surge capacity for 8 to 12 weeks across the summer. And obviously we have that in different times as well. So that's the sort of evidence that we are pulling out, that we are going to be submitting to the Home Office. For Devon, Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, we do have quite unique in England and Wales, where we are a peninsula, we have islands, we have coastal, we have rural, and we have urban. So we're trying to evidence that mix within it and the way that we want to police the area does increase the cost to the force. This is to be built into the funding formula, which will hopefully go out to consultation later this year. The closing date is the 3rd of October, so we are up against the deadlines. So we will be submitting by the end of next week to ensure that Devon and Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly's voice is heard.
Have you done? Any questions, members? It's a fairly comprehensive report. Thank you for that. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of different areas, so I'll ask one and then give other people a chance and then come back with the other, if that's all right. So it's almost a year since Bobby Ann McLeod was murdered. Section 8 of your report is almost identical to that of our last meeting. Given the biggest rise in hate crime being gender-related, isn't it about time your report started talking about the action being taken rather than looking forward to things being done at some time in the future without being clear what those things are? It's what we asked you to do at our last meeting, and I was hoping for something different. I'm disappointed, but what I'm worried is that to local women and girls in Plymouth, it would appear that you're letting them down. Could we have an assurance that next time the report will contain activity rather than a rehash of this report and the last report? Thank you.
If I may, Chairman, I'll just highlight to you, I suppose the point is some of the activity that's taking place isn't just focused on violence against women and girls, but for example, our Safer Streets bid, Plymouth has been successful again. Specifically, some of that element is around creating safer streets for women. I'm really pleased to see from the previous round of Safer Streets, which Plymouth was also successful, we've actually got installed now, thank you Plymouth City Council and partners, the help points that are in particular locations in Plymouth, which were specifically designed actually to help women and girls on the street feel safe and be able to reach out for help. So proactively and tangibly, there are some help points on the streets which were consulted with the public around where was the best place to put those as well. So we've got some really good action on the ground in specifically that's come via my office working with Plymouth City Council. The other thing I particularly will highlight, I'm just being very Plymouth focused here, Chairman, bear with. The other thing that's really key, and I think we might have mentioned it in the last report, and I apologise if we didn't, it's not, I don't think it's in this one, I don't know, it's not in this one, but something called Operation Soteria, which is the way in which police forces carry out their rape investigations and sexual violence investigations, was piloted in Avon and Somerset, and it was really looking and drilling down into what was going wrong, how could we do things differently with an academic researcher support alongside. As a Southwest region, we have accepted the principles of Operation Soteria happening within this force, and we actually have a pilot being carried out in Plymouth as I speak called Operation Gemstone, which is to proactively and tangibly put into practice those principles. So you've got a specialist unit right now who are there to help support the investigation of serious offences, and obviously majority of those are against women in Plymouth that are being focused on. So those are just two really key examples of practical things that we're doing on the ground, supporting the force to do, supporting Plymouth City Council to do, basically supporting other people to be able to create safer environments for women.
Thank you. Obviously, your report says that you publicly welcome the findings of the Commission. The Commission has specific recommendations. Those do include recommendations for the police. It would be good to see in your report those warm words of support turned into this recommendation said this is what we have done, in order that, as you have a section on it, as it relates specifically to a horrific murder in Plymouth. And I'm not saying that violence against women and girls doesn't happen elsewhere, and you have reporting elsewhere in your report on that, but relating to this, where the Commission was secured, that it would be good to see in your report, because this is effectively your report to the public, the role that you are taking in this, because you have said you welcome the report, and it would be good to see your words demonstrated in actions. I'm not saying you're not, but it does look like you're not, and that's not healthy for anyone at this point in time.
Just to say, Chairman, I'd be more than happy if Plymouth City Council, as part of the VOL Commission, was run by Plymouth, if they're going to do an annual report, so that we can all contribute as partners from those recommendations on an annual basis to show that we're moving and taking them forward. I'd be more than welcome to offer my support to contribute to something that Plymouth as a city would like to do in particular. I think that would be really helpful, because I'm worried that Commission report's going to be on the shelf after a while, and we might want to try and see how we celebrate a year on.
Thank you, Commissioner. This just mentions Plymouth at the moment, but I know Exeter have a similar thing going on. It's called SWAN or something like that. Is it Safety of Women at Night? Laura, do you know anything about it?
Yes, I'm apparently a champion
Right.
of it.
Thought you were.
But haven't been given a horse. Yeah, it's really good, and we can actually see the tangible effects of that. One of the things is a big increase in our CCTV coverage across the city. So this was a bid, a joint bid from the university, but also Exeter City Council, but it was done in the university's name for all sorts of reasons that were good for us. So we're housing the extra CCTV cameras, new infrastructure in the control room. There's going to be a safe place, a travelling sort of safe place bus that will be going around and stopping at various points. So if anybody needs to just jump on that bus to then talk to somebody, if they need first aid, or if they need somebody to maybe call someone to come and pick them up, or if they're worried they're being followed, etc. It's a safe place to go, but that's the university that's going to be doing that, but it's covering the whole city for everybody, all the residents. And there's lots of work going on with bystander training, and also to have signage in regular spots across the city. So if you are concerned, if you're on your own and you're concerned and feeling vulnerable, you can ring the number, and the CCTV controllers will make sure that they can find you on the camera and just be able to talk to you to let you know that you're in sight. So there's an awful lot of things that are very tangible and are happening right now. So I'm very grateful for that. It's sometimes the words and the plans and the promises can go on forever, but this is actually seeing everything happening, and increased staffing in the CCTV control room as well was something that I personally got involved in, and we're budgeting for that going forward. And I know that the police force has helped with that. Any more help you can carry on giving us, of course, we would not say no to, and would always welcome. But thank you for the chance to talk about that, Chair.
Thank you, Laura. Any further questions on the Commissioner's update here from members of the panel? Chris?
No one else is going to jump in. I'm sure the Commissioner would be disappointed if I didn't. I just wanted to pick up on something that I raised last time, and it's not to do with anything I've talked about yet today. Last time I talked about moving vehicle offences, especially noise. Residents are once again being told that this is antisocial behaviour. Could you clarify whether a moving vehicle offence is antisocial behaviour or a moving vehicle offence?
If I had that clarity, and the police had that clarity, and the council had that clarity, we wouldn't be having this conversation, would we? I think, Councillor Penberthy, I've had a briefing that tells me that Chief Superintendent Matt Longman is really looking at how they can look at that excessive noise as a moving vehicle offence, a moving traffic offence, sorry. I think that's the terminology. And there's some plans being drawn up at the moment. I believe you've actually, suggested this. It might even be your idea. So I think there's some work that is definitely going on as a special niche piece of work in Plymouth at the moment. It may well be able to be used elsewhere, but I know that they are specifically trying to look at a particular offence to be able to use to tackle that problem.
My understanding, including from people within the motorbike and power car communities, are that cars are actually being MOT'd without baffles, or with baffles easily removable, and motorbikes. But you can't track the MOT people down unless you catch them first doing it. The fact they've had the baffles removed is a criminal offence. The people who are suffering are people, especially late at night, who don't then able to say, other than, I was woken up by a loud vehicle, I don't know whether it was a car, I don't know whether it was a motorbike, and have no evidence, so aren't able to trigger antisocial behaviour stuff, because being woken up by a loud vehicle isn't. So we've got a group of residents caught. I'm sure that the centre of Plymouth is not the only place that this is happening. And if we can crack it here, I think we can probably crack it in lots of other communities across the southwest peninsula. We have it all year round because of the Barbican. I'm sure other people have it as a more seasonal issue. But if we could crack it, it would do a lot of good for our local residents. And the residents who are talking to me most are young parents and elderly people living in specialist elderly accommodation. And those are both talking about the impact on their health and well-being of themselves, their partners and their children. But I'm interested to know that work is being done, because no one's told me about that. So, get Matt to give me a call.
Or perhaps we should invite Superintendent Longman along at some time.
Gosh, you want the police officers here a lot, don't you?
Of course. I'm sort of concerned that we're tipping into operational matters here, and I'm sort of on the fringe at the moment. So, okay.
Sorry, Chair, the only reason I raised it is that I know the leader of the council, the chief constable, the commissioner and I are being bombarded with one or two residents, but there are some persistent residents writing to all of us, and it seems to be falling through everyone's gaps. And if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be raising it, but it's the fact that it's one of these things that no one seems to be able to take ownership of at the moment that is worrying for communities, and some or other, it does feel that the Commissioner needs to be able to help us take a lead on this, because I think it does probably rely a bit on legality of vehicles when they are moving.
I'm sure she'll be delighted. Anything further on the update at all? No, so I'm going to recommend the panel note the report. Thank you very much. So item 8, Police and Crime Plan 21-21, 2021-2025 scorecard. Can I hand over to the Commissioner, or is it Felicity?
Chairman, I was going to suggest going straight to questions on the scorecard, just for the saving of time.
Okay. Good. Nikki Hopwood.
Thank you, Chairman. I am really disappointed that the 999 wait times 101, I don't know what P1 and P2 are, but whatever they are just increasing consistently. You know, they're on an upward trend. They have been for many months. And when members of the public dial 999, it's an emergency. There are very few times I would hope that it's done lightly. When they dial 101, to them, it's still serious, although they realise it's not as serious. So members of the public dial 101. But these call times are going up and up. 101P2 went up 9 minutes from which was from what was reported in July. I don't know, Chairman, if we could have we used to have deep dives into certain aspects of the police force, and I think this is one of those things. 999 and 101 calls are something that I think we should really look into as a panel and get a detailed explanation of just why you cannot bring them down. Thank you.
I think we did at one stage, in fact I know we did at one stage, Nikki, in the previous panel, before your time, so to speak, on the panel. It's certainly leaping at the moment, isn't it? I mean, I've got call wait times leapt by 8 minutes. Does it need a handler on the other end of the line every time someone rings 101? Can it go straight into a answer phone or something similar, which can be picked up later at least? I mean, because the thought of spending 33 minutes on the phone for a 101 situation, I'm almost convinced, I'm totally convinced actually, that most of the callers actually hang up. And that is a worrying problem. So that affects the confidence in the police as well. So I'm wondering if we can't streamline this in some way. I appreciate that it can go through on email or WhatsApp or whatever the flipping thing is, but to be hanging on the end of a telephone for 33 minutes strikes me as being sort of like, it's a slow walk to death, I should think. Have you got any comments on that?
Well, Thank you, Chairman. I mean, I have to say that the contact centre is one of the most disappointing areas of service that Devon and Cornwall Police offer at the moment. It is now the force's priority. I've asked how the executive can make it a whole force priority, not just left to one assistant chief constable to try and fix, because they are unable to fix it. There are a lot of complicated problems that are associated with the performance on here. You'll be really pleased to know Policing Scotland has better performance figures than we do. So I'm hoping that Mr Kerr will be able to bring some of that inspiration into the force. We have invested heavily, as you know, millions of pounds. We have recruited probably now at least 50 staff in the last 2 years, extra than they ordinarily would have, that's paid for by the precept, and we still aren't getting anywhere with it. There's still some issues there. One of them is a real technicality issue with the IT that has been delayed and delayed and delayed, and this is the biggest thing that needs to change, and they are trialling it. I'm looking at Fran, because this is honestly the most painful conversations that I have with the force around this area. My team get weekly updates on what's happening with the system. It is in trial at the moment, the new upgrade that is required. That will allow callback. I am right. Yes. Don't tell me I'm wrong, because we've had this conversation 2 years ago, I believe, Chairman, about trying to do callback. If I'm really frank, the way the system feels at the moment, though, I don't think the public would have the confidence to leave an answer phone message, because they wouldn't think anyone was picking it up. So what we've introduced over this summer period, through pressure from my office, is there were actually some additional police officers put into the contact centre in terms of helping sort out some of the problems. And there was also triage was reinvented so that the phone would at least get answered by a human being before you were put onto a secondary line where you might have to wait for the right person. So that wasn't happening before. It was you literally had a number, what's it called? Independent voice recognition. Is that right? It's been really tricky, this one, to the extent that I will need to bring somebody in from outside if they can't fix it soon enough. I am aware they are bringing in a new member of staff to head up the contact centre, so I will be looking forward to your meeting with them next week to find out exactly what they think they're going to try and do this time, because this will be about the 10th person attempting to try and fix the problem. But it's not good performance for this force. I do think it is affecting the confidence of our communities, and I will particularly affect their confidence around antisocial behaviour, because they won't bother to report it. I'm hearing from businesses that they're not bothering to report aggravated shoplifting even. And it's because of the 101 phone line in particular. So we have got some issues that we know are really bad. I'm glad you brought it up, because it is the number one priority at the moment of the Chief Constable to fix as a corporate entity, rather than leaving it to one person to sort, as they always have done in the past, to take corporate responsibility for it. So we're not seeing the results come through yet to improve that, other than the email backlogs have improved dramatically. So that turnaround time has got better. But it's not at its best, and I completely accept that at the moment. Well, I don't accept it. I accept that we recognise that that's a major problem.
And I think this goes back to your predecessor even. So I mean, we are talking about sort of like 7 years or something like that. Chris, so Nikki, you're going to say something, and then I'll come to you, Chris.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Knight. I'm glad to hear the sheer frustration in your voice, because that alone leads me to believe that if you're up the pole about it, it's going to get somehow resolved. Can I ask that a report is brought back to the next meeting where we are told what you think the problems are, how you've identified them, and how you're going to fix them? I think some sort of report to us as a panel would give some comfort that actually although I hear you're taking it seriously, I would just like to know what steps you're actually doing, because it's sad to read these statistics, but I want some substance to know that you actually are as passionate on paper as you are in your voice, and the Chief Executive is absolutely committed to solving this problem. So I would welcome that at the next panel meeting, if that was okay, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I picked this up as well. I think my concern wasn't only that waiting times are rising, but that connected calls are plummeting. So not only is it taking longer to answer, but since our last report, 9,000 less calls. That is really worrying because there is nothing here on dropped calls. I'm sure you've got the information, it isn't in the headline. There's nothing here on the split between 999, 101 and online, which gives a sense of prioritisation in the public's perspective. You're talking about a slowdown in the rate of hate crime reporting, which might be good, but could be because people aren't reporting because they can't get through. And your massive fall in ASB reporting, and I know most of the people who are talking to me say it's a waste of time. Yet we've got people who are talking about quite high levels of ASB because of the nature of the ward I represent. So they talk to me, but they don't see the point in reporting. So I think this is a massive issue for policing. What surprises me is that public confidence isn't dropping, but could I say it's not dropping yet? And I think, I was trying to think, Chair, we've been in existence for 10 years because it was 2012 that Commissioner Hogg first got elected, and probably we were talking about this within a month or two of our first meetings. So this has been something that's been going on for far too long for our local residents. And I just wanted to back up that we do need something serious happening about this, because my concern is that all the other things I want to talk about are actually tied up in this rather than themselves. So I was just going to highlight that as well on my comments. So thank you.
Chairman, if I may, one of the reasons I was reopening police station front desks is to try and bypass this insane problem that we have of being able to fix some form of speedy response in terms of people's concern about crime. So 6 are being opened by November. Again, they'll be open. Whether they'll be 100% open for the full opening hours is yet to be determined because of recruitment challenges. So, I'm determined to open more police front desks. I think Mr. Kerr will have a robust conversation with me, I'm sure, when we get to the budget, particularly next year, about what he will or won't tolerate, which he might lose something else in relation to trying to reopen them. But we've got to get those police stations open so people feel that policing is on their side. So if it is sometimes difficult when it's a peak time to get through to 101 or even 999, because you do know when it's an absolute peak time, it'll trip to another force to answer it, so someone at least answers it. So there is real challenges, and this isn't just a Devon and Cornwall police problem, it is a national problem in England and Wales. So I think we are aware of that, but for me, and even though you've been discussing it for years, I would say the performance has got worse over the last recent years, partly because 999 calls, it's had about a 25% increase overall in 999 calls over the past few years. That's been part of the challenge because they're prioritised to answer first. But if you were to look at this, you would say they weren't prioritised to answer first because it's going down. So that, this is all the scrutiny that I'm doing in-house. But reopening those front desks and any pressure you can continue to put on me about making sure that we do that to show that we are on the side of our communities, I'm more than happy for you to support me in any of those endeavours.
Thank you. Lewis.
Yeah, just to follow on from that, I'm just wondering whether you feel there might be a bit more education to the public or us as councillors. We mentioned about advocate councillors, about how we can actually report things online. What type of things can be reported online? Because if you've got higher percentages in the 999 calls, perhaps they should go online or go on 101. So do you feel there could be a bit more work to be done on that?
There's always more work to be done on educating the public about ways in which they can contact the police. And I will say that I don't think the Force Comms has had as big a focus on that in recent times. I think one of our challenges, though, just in terms of, if you are a victim of crime, no matter how much you might be frightened to speak to somebody, you still want to speak to somebody rather than go online and write out a form and hope somebody gets it and not know when it's going to come back to you or you're going to get contacted. We know that people who are distressed, who I speak to, who've been victims of crime, need to speak to someone, because there's a lot, even if it's what we would consider a minor crime, a non-violent crime that may happen to them, that they may well be distressed and they need some support. And fundamentally at the moment, that I need to create more opportunities to support policing, to do as many opportunities to be able to speak to those individuals than I do be constantly worried about the online side of things. Because I've got people who I've obviously referred to do it online because they can't get anywhere, but it might take days before they're replied to, and that's what they don't know, and they're already distressed. So the phone line is a really important element, I think, but the force comms could do more around promoting the engagement. You will see from my drugs work, Op Scorpion, that I'm doing in the region with the 4 other police and crime commissioners, I didn't dare say ring 101 and report drug dealing, because all I would have done is inundated the phone lines further. So we had to support Crime Stoppers, and it is the right route because it's anonymous, but it's a really good way to say I'm serious about knowing about drug dealing, and I'm not taking the mick by saying ring 101, because I know that that would look disingenuous. So just so that you're aware, that's the sort of things with tactics we're trying to look at, is why don't we use Crime Stoppers more? Why can't Crime Stoppers be more of a route for some of our callers? So again, there are some of those strategic conversations happening with Crime Stoppers about what are the options available through them as well. So there are other things that we're trying to do, but I do still think the ability to speak to someone is quite critical if you've been a victim of crime. That's why our victim services is also another option, so you can at least get to somebody and get some care and help if you can't get through.
Thank you. So will you let me know in the next few weeks whether you can produce a report just to say, look, you know, we know there's a problem, this is what we're trying to do, this is the problem, and a small paper on it for the next panel meeting? I'd be grateful. Thank you. Members, any further questions on the scorecard? No, so I'd just like the panel to note the report. Lots of nodding heads, thank you very much. So item 9, complaints against Police and Crime Commissioner. Can I hand over to Fran, please, to provide an update?
Thank you. Nice and straightforward, Chair. There have been no new complaints since the last panel, so nothing to report.
Very good. Very smart. So, again, the panel should note the report. It is 3 minutes to 6. I'll close the meeting. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Commissioner, Mr. Kerr, Fran, Nikki, Felicity, Pierre, Lara. Thanks, Ross.